Growth was an ephemeral structure in Floating Land 2013. It was conceived, fabricated and assembled through a designed process of collaborative making.
We really wanted to collaborate on this project. Bark Lab was set up for a laboratory of ideas and a collaboration, and so we worked with the University of Queensland School of Architecture students who came on board, and we just built this fantastic team who did all the CNC routering and the laser cutting and then the assembling, the transport, and we spent a good week here doing the install. It was just a whole lot of fun, team building and character building.
Beautiful, smart camera.
Growth was created by architects and designers from Bark Lab with students from the University of Queensland's Architecture School for the Sunshine Coast Biennial Green Art Festival. Growth celebrated the essential crossover between art and architecture as art by architects who investigate the site as the first and essential act in our architectural design process. As architects, we approach land art through the idea of site and place. Celebrating a site-specific response was a concept that Bark Lab wanted to share with visitors to the festival. We also extended the conversations to online platforms, which extended the audience and temporary timeframe of the festival.
From conception to installation, Growth really provided a wonderful framework for collaborative making locally and was concurrently recorded and made public globally via social media platforms.
The prototyping is essential to any project like this. I mean, you're kind of learning by doing and learning about changing your ideas by doing and building them. So from a simple sketch or a balsa model or plywood prototyping, it was all intrinsic to the overall design process.
The way that we've been practicing as Bark Lab is really actually a very similar process that we do with architecture as well, in that when we first selected our site, we immediately had a survey carried out so that we could really map the landscape and then analyse the orientation and the components existing on the site to try and work with those.
One of the main highlights was the launch party at the Bark Studio. It was a point to celebrate the fabrication stage before the installation phase with the team, friends and colleagues. It was an amazing soiree of sculpture, music and live projections.
The symbol that we chose was actually the Boronia keysii flower, which only grows in the upper reaches of the Noosa River. It was the old Noosa Council logo. It also is used for the Noosa Biosphere logo as well. We chose that, and then the parts in between become the water sails, which are an 8-sided piece.
The key concept with Growth was that there would be small components and they would interlock together and form a larger component.
It's kind of interesting how you've got these one little pieces that then come into these two pieces together, that they come into a row, that then come into a sail. So it's a nice little process of components actually.
We also introduced mirror acrylic, which really plays with the reflections and the ambiguity with the water and reflections of landscape onto the piece. We're hoping they'll turn out a little bit like clouds, quite ambiguous with the shimmering and reflection.
So basically right now we're just installing the kinetic parts, which are these spinning flower that's gonna channel through the structure, and what they do is basically create reflections and create lighting, sort of shimmering spaces that are gonna reflect the surroundings, creating this ambiguity within the structure. And what that does is sort of brings the structure to life and creates this sort of flow of energy throughout the landscape.
Just located some of the water sails, the first steel footing panel, which the big challenge here is trying to get it level and trying to get it secure. There's a few rocks on the bottom of the lake, so it's a case of really sort of bedding in that steel. It's quite heavy, but even so it's quite awkward.
Basically these two pieces that they've got in the water at the moment are the bases for what we call the wind sails. And they're made out of steel and they've had water jet cut shapes welded onto the top of them. What they're doing is submerging them into the lake so that then we can build the big sails on them later. What Chun's doing there at the moment is actually measuring how level that particular submerged plate is already. And what the guys are doing is tying some stakes onto the top of the other one so that it's visible from above the water, so that kayakers and things like that don't actually scrape over the top of it. The way that we approached this project was really look at the way that we would interact between the different pieces. We've got the lashings, we've got the wind sails, we've got the water sails, and then as well as that we've got a series of seats which become stations for viewing those particular pieces from different angles. And there's one particular point on the wind sails where you have the universal kind of symbol of the house as they line up, and as you walk along the road they're like sails passing on the water beyond.
Behind me is the part of our growth project called The Grove, and it's really highlighting this nice little stand of trees here, which is so important to this part of the site. We're binding in a sort of ancient Japanese philosophy of binding trees which make them sacred. What we're doing is binding at a horizontal datum level which is relative to a particular vantage point. So no other place on the site you'll have the same reading, so it's all about the individual experience when you're sitting in the swivel seat, and you'll pick up the topography in the background just by all these ropes lining up. So everywhere else they look random and haphazard, and in this particular point they're all perfectly horizontal.
From the seat, the rotating seat, which is a piece of tallow wood that still has its bark on, it's highly polished on the top, your eye line actually looks across the horizon of the water against the Kulula National Park, and it's really a way of measuring the floating land datum. The axis is actually to really navigate between the township of Boring Point and Noosa Hill, so that people have some sort of idea about their relationship to the region. Look, the Noosa National Park is an absolutely integral part of Noosa, and in fact the biosphere is the old Noosa Shire boundary. So really the position that you take, and it's just for one person at a time, looking between the wind sails, between the water sails, and having Noosa Hill in the background, is just a way of navigating from this tiny town of Boring Point to Noosa Heads itself.
Well, the Growth Project provided a variety of design experiences and learning situations to the BARC team, architecture students, as well as primary school students through a series of workshops, floating land artists and festival visitors, as well as sparking a number of global conversations online.
Probably the most rewarding thing about the project has been the process, the design-build process, but also the collaboration with University of Queensland and a whole range of people who were involved. It's really one of those projects that was, we hope, greater than the sum of all its smaller parts, and that goes back down to the actual plywood motifs. They start off with a small flower and they grow to something much more spectacular.